Working together for a better end of life for our clothes.
Nous reprenons ce
So
temps.
coming back to the second session. So now we're going to look at the export of second-hand clothes towards Africa. So this is a complex issue which raises many feisty debates across the world. So we still have these images, these shocking images. We remember, for example, this mountain of waste that we can see in rivers, lakes, beaches. I'm thinking about Ghana, for example. And then when I saw these pictures, I said, well, this is absolutely awful. We have to stop sending them all this stuff. And then when I was discussing things, taking things a bit further, so the situation a bit more complex. It's not as simple as all that. But all these shocking pictures, these raise alarm bells on our own responsibility. And it really is time to look at what we actually send and look at this subject, give the floor to those players who can perhaps explain this complexity to us. So this complexity, and this is what creates all the problems. It is a complex issue on the social media. It's not often the complexity which is most visible. So I suggest that we try and simplify this for everybody. And so this is about emotion, basically. And so we have to put things in context, educate people. And so we need to put back the complexity into this situation. Yes, there's tension, there's abuse, but there are also some benefits from what we call major export. And this is what we're going to talk about and discuss in the next hour. So we're going to try and clarify things so everybody can play their own role, starting with the sorting gesture, first of all. So we're going to clarify this, but first of all, we need to understand this context. What is a major export? And we're going to talk about this with Pascal Ansart, and he's going to come on the stage during the jingle. He's head of ADL.
Le bouton vert pour passer. Pascal, alors Pascal.
So Pascal, so as I said, so you're a senior organizer at ADL, so you have a wonderful mission. You're going to try and make us understand what major exports mean. So we have about 12 minutes. I have going to put a question to you, which is extremely simple. So explain this to us then, and then I'm going to ask you some other questions. So tell us what this is all about, Pascal. So we're going to try and give you a couple of facts. This is a very sensitive issue, as I'm sure you've all understood. And what's important is to understand the different mechanisms that there are behind this, and why does this exist, and what are the volumes we're talking about. Because when you see these reports and all these shocking images, it's not necessarily the exporting countries that we necessarily think about. So let's put things in context. So these are figures that are quite recent on what this represents and where the export comes from. So here you have a breakdown. We talked about this before. You have the market here, 2023, 833,000 tons were put onto the market, 268,000 tons were collected, and then a certain number of these tons were sorted by sorters who have been approved by Refashion. And behind all this, what you need to note is what's happening here. So first of all, you put it in a drop-off point, you collect it, you sort it, and the first thing is you sort out the good items. And this is for France in blue. 58.6%. So this is reused in France and sent to various stores or handled by private players. And the rest is reused. So we have 90% of this 58%, which goes for export. So now major exports, several things. Those are products that have been reconditioned once they've been sorted, put into bale, and they go off into various countries. And that's the system of supply and demand. So if we have products that are sold for export, that means that there's demand for this. Why is there demand? Because in developing countries, especially in Africa, but also in Central America, there's a need for equipment, quite simply. So the people, you don't necessarily have stores there all over the place to buy new products. So they use a lot of these reconditioned second-hand products that we find on the market, and they go through a certain cycle. So what you need to keep in mind is this figure of 53% of those volumes which are recovered, sorted. Well, they're not sorted just any old how. In terms of the different volumes that are sorted, T-shirts, sweatshirts, trousers, sneakers, etc. There's much more of a demand for those, and so this goes off to hotter countries, whereas woolen coats and other things like that would not go to that kind of country. So keep this figure in mind, 53%. So where do these products go? So here you have a European figure, and this is from the customs authority, because of course you have to declare everything that's going through customs. And what we see from this is that in Europe, we have just under 2,000 tons that go off to these various destinations. So to Africa, first of all, and then to Central America. Then you have other flows that come from Asia to Africa, or from the US to South America. And all this is a huge flow. Well, after sorting in France, but this figure is for 2021, so it was quite difficult to update this to get the reliable information. And so we've got the last figures we have are for 2021. Now, if we talk about France in particular, if we zoom in on France, which represents 168,000 tons. So what are the destination countries for this? The first country is Tunisia. So Tunisia is not the final destination of the product, because in Tunisia we have sorting centers there as well, French sorting centers, and they send things to Tunisia, and then those items go off to African countries on the African continent. So this is why Tunisia is the first destination country for export products, but then it's broken down into several other countries as well, and especially Africa. Pakistan, that's the second country. Pakistan gets or receives second-hand products, but also receives products that will be recycled. Recycled, shredded, so that other fiber-based products can be produced. So it's an export product that will be recycled, so it's not just reused. So the second country then is Pakistan. Third country, Haiti. Tobago. So if you can see the poverty that exists in these countries, they have to have clothes, they have to have equipment as well. And so it's a destination country then, because there's a major need. So really understanding that behind this process, there is a demand and there is a need. It's not just, okay, I'm just getting rid of what I don't want. This market exists, and it exists because there's a supply and demand. Now, what happens then in terms of what's been happening over the last couple of years? What you see here, so these, once again, the last figures that we're able to have different exporting countries. You can see that Europe is a major exporter, but Europe is increasingly regulated. France, in particular, is one of those countries where these flows are the most controlled, the most traced everywhere. So then you have other countries like the US, and just to give you an idea, there are some countries that export. So this is between 2008, 2020, 21. At the European level there, during this period, that's 1.7 times. So the GDP, the world GDP has increased by 38%. So the population has also increased. So you have to integrate those factors. But China and Pakistan, they re-exported enormous number of products or used products and or unsold products that that weren't sold on the Chinese market and which go off onto these other destination countries. So you can see that you need to integrate all these different factors so that we can understand the equation and so that we can have an opinion on this, even if solutions do exist. So Pakistan, 1 times 68. Well, the base is very low. So of course the multiplier may seem enormous, but whereas in Europe, we had a high base and we had a counting system for Europe. Everything is traced. And so the multiplier is lower. So we're not talking about the same volumes at all. We're talking 370,000 tons and versus 1,900 tons. So it's not the same multiplier. So just to show you the dynamics that are at play here. In 2023, 2024, the dynamic from those countries from exports to Africa, this is huge. And it's completely disrupted the sorting, recycling system that was taking place then. So in France, okay, we sort quite well, and we send these items because there's a demand which has been expressed, and there are other countries that send these things, export these things, even though there isn't a demand for them. So yes, if there is an export, then of course there's a demand, and so, but they're not necessarily products of the same quality. What we normally say is that in terms of sorting, the French people, Europeans, and we'll talk about this with other speakers, the quality of products, second-hand products is of much higher quality than in Europe than in China or other Asian countries. So it's not at all the same thing. So just another figure in terms of Ghana, 1%. So Ghana, so we talk a lot about Ghana, but then you see that there are solutions, but you have to find solutions on the ground. So it's the same for Burkina Faso, for a whole host of different countries. So what do we do on site for those products that are not sold? So if there's no solution for that, if we can't recycle the waste for those products that are unsold, then this is where we all have to help and collaborate to find a long-lasting solution. But it's not so easy. Another question. Now, if we kept this in France to make a new resort, would this disrupt the whole system or what? Would it be a stupid idea? No, it's not a silly idea. All ideas are good. I just want to say that there are 2 obstacles there. We don't have enough of this in Europe. All different players are working together to develop the new capacity, but we don't have enough capacity at the moment in order to recycle all these textiles. So we can find outlets for them, and there's a demand. So for insulating products, for example, but it's quite complex nevertheless. This is about investment, which requires a lot of capex. Times are tough, and you also need the right volumes, the right quality. So all European countries have to get together to allow industrial players to invest. We saw this before. We need to invest in this sector so that we can find an outlet for these products and then create this circular economy. And a last couple of words, we saw this before. The illegal flows of goods, we see these huge mountains of waste, CHX, but we're somewhat responsible for that. But it's very difficult to trace all this. It's very complicated to follow the lead, as it were. So it's also outside on the pavement. The drop-off station, the clothing bank. So you see these drop-off points that have been pillaged and vandalized. But so those people will sort and take anything of high volume, high quality, excuse me, and the rest is just kind of left on the ground, and it's not good for anything. So we can't use that. So we have to be very careful and not necessarily put all these things in bags. So we have these drop-off points outside buildings. You need to be well organized. So there's about 1/3 of the collected products that escape the traceability and refashion. So this is where we get the illegal flows coming from. So thank you very much for this overview. So we can give you a round of applause. So now we talked about this, but we need to go into detail. What about the economic opportunities from major export in developing countries? So some answers now with a video, which is, so you will see the quality of the video. So this is a video, and we'll see you in a 5. This is on Ghana. So a socioeconomic and environmental study of the second-hand clothes trade in Ghana. Malvin Owusu.
Basically, my name is Malvin Owusu. I am an executive director of the Ghana Youth Clothing Dealers Association. Pretty much, we are the body that helps to govern the trade of second-hand clothing in Ghana. That is circa about 7% of the Ghanaian population who are actually involved in the trade, which is extremely huge. 7% of any economy or even any country being involved in such a trade is a very big thing. So that shows that it's a very big thing in Ghana. Really, it's not only for the core traders, but it also creates indirect jobs for the likes of tailors, seamstresses. You have drivers of trucks, you have like logistics companies as well, to name a few. So that's kind of the employment that it also creates. Also, in terms of taxes, the Ghanaian government generates in the region of $30 million in tax revenue annually in the second-hand clothing trade, which is huge for a country such as Ghana. And also, majority of the Ghanaian population does wear second-hand clothing. Also, when you look at the demographics, we have majority of the people involved in the trade are women. And when you look at the demographics, about 52% of the people involved in the trade are women, 48% are the men. And you also have a high level of involvement by the youth. So 1/3 of the people that are involved in the trade are the youth, and about 65% are 40 and under. So what we need to understand is, importers are the main point of contact who bring clothing into the country. I think the business aspect of it gives understanding to a lot of things. So at the end of the day, I import what my customers require. Other importers import what their customers require. So we don't think that there's so much of an influx of so much clothing in Ghana from, let's say, the perspective of the global north, because of, let's say, fast fashion, because that's where, let's say, fast fashion starts from, let's say, Europe and all of that. Maybe there's overproduction on that sense. And when I had the opportunity of engaging in different conferences, you find a lot that those who are collecting clothing are struggling a little bit because there's so much clothing. And because there's so much clothing, they are not getting the right price to sell to, let's say, my supplier, because my supplier wants to buy it at a particular price. But when it comes to, let's say, the global south, because we import what we need, there is not so much oversupply here. So that is when if you realize the quality, then this starts to decline. So yes, in terms of the quality, a drop in the quality of clothing, I acknowledge that is true. However, what I want to note is in quality metrics that as a country, we make sure that it doesn't go below, even though, let's say, the quality of clothing has dropped. The reason being that people in Ghana want affordable clothing, but they want quality as well. The Ghanaian market especially, they are extremely very fussy customers. So if you import goods affordable and not of good quality, what you're doing is that you're going to end up and they'll end up going to buy from other importers who they believe that they can trust or they can get better quality items from. So yes, we do acknowledge that there's a drop in the quality of clothing that is coming through, but we need to make sure that as much as possible, whatever we are bringing into the country are stuff that are wearable, are stuff that are quality, are stuff that our people can afford to buy, and they're stuff that they can wear for a longer term. Also, one of the ways in which as importers, we make sure that we are enhancing the quality of items that are coming in and making sure that we are always on top of quality is quarterly engagements with our suppliers. So first and foremost, Ghana as a country has an issue with general waste management. I think it's not only Ghana that has issues with general waste management. I think countries even in the global north and everyone or countries are trying to find ways and means of better managing their waste. A country such as Ghana is not outside of it. We also struggle with general waste management. Based on independent reports that have been conducted, we're able to, for example, textile waste into context. So reports for example, the independent report commissioned by the Ghana Youth Clothing Dealers Association shows that textile waste is in the region of 2%. Reports have come from the GIZ, from the Oxford Economics as well recently, which shows that textile waste is in the region of 4%. So let's use the figure about under 5%. That's how waste that we are talking about. So if we talk about textile waste, general waste, that means in Ghana, for example, the majority of waste comes from plastics, and then you have metals, you have papers and others before you come to textile waste. Inclusive of textile waste also, because textile waste involves industrial waste as well, because we have manufacturers as well that, let's say, local textiles. So like industry of cuts and everything, that's also classified as textile waste. So you see that even in the 2% textile waste, secondhand clothing is a part of the 2%. How do we do that? I believe that one of the ways in which we can improve is looking at recycling infrastructure, for example. Are these going to come from extended producer responsibility schemes? That's a possibility that we can look at. If, let's say, manufacturers or the origin of fabric manufacturers of fast fashion, these EPL schemes are effectively used, some of these fees can trickle down into a country such as Ghana to help establish, for example, recycling infrastructure. But the recycling infrastructure should be set up for all forms of waste, because if you set up something for just 5% of the waste, I believe that you're not doing the country of a greater service, because there's a bigger problem at large. I wish we can have recycling infrastructures that can check out into what Pakistan can do, check out into raw materials that can start the whole circular process as well. That is what I hope the next 5 to 10 years will have in store for us.
Oui, on peut applaudir Marvin Ouzou.
Yes, I think that we can applaud Marvin, who is probably following on a remote basis, and we can ask our questions in the discussion that's going to take place. You know, I think that there is a lot of vocation here. With Marvin Owusu, we see the reality is not simple. You know, there are sometimes simplistic concepts, but all of this is, you know, calling our attention. We should not forget, our critical spirit. We should not forget to ask questions online. And don't forget to put things on the chat. Make the network more complex. I'd like to ask our next speaker to come and talk about the environmental impact of this export. It's clear that we need to be collaborative here, so I'm going to ask Julia Faure, the founder of Loom, president of Ahmed Klima, Rachid Cherfaoui from the Solidarity Economy of Pays du Bray, Jacques Gindre from Muliez Fleury, and Edem Dalmeida, founder of Africa Global Recycling, and Moi Je Trie.
Voilà, tout le monde trouve sa place.
So,
Moi, ma place est
will
ici.
everyone have a seat?
Je suis enchanté de vous,
I'm
de vous
delighted
avoir
to
avec
have
nous
you
dans
here with us
dans ce
today
débat où il y a plein
for
de
this
grands mots qu'on va essayer
discussion, where there are a lot
on va
of
essayer de tricoter
big
avec vous.
words that we're going to
J'ai
try
envie de
to
démarrer par vous, Julia.
explain. I'd like to start with you, Julia.
Julia, on l'a vu, alors on l'a vu avec la
Julia,
vidéo de Marvin, on en a parlé aussi
we
avec Pascal
saw
Ansart.
with
Pourquoi
Marvin's video,
arrêter le grand export en
why
gros?
should
Pourquoi
we
arrêter
stop
d'envoyer des produits? Ça fait
this
vraiment une mauvaise idée.
export abroad? I think it would be a good idea. First of all, in these countries, you know, their economy very often they depend on the used clothes. We talk about Ghana a great deal, but you know that this is true to other countries where France exports. For example, Haiti. There is a portion of the population which depends on this used clothes market coming from Europe. And this is even more worrisome that the profitability of the sector is decreasing. Ghana, we have the example here because we have the figures. The percentage of people who buy clothes from exporters, you know, they are making only $60 a month, you know. So people are living just above the threshold of poverty. So if we stop sending these clothes, then we will condemn people to poverty. And so we might ask the question, why is it these people are living less and less well, where even though there are more and more clothing exported there? Well, you see the same thing happening in those countries as in France. That is to say, the money made at the downstream level are in fact for those clothing pieces which are quality, the cream of it, you know, if you, of the recycled clothing. You know, the problem is the fast fashion with the low quality, which cannot be resold. In France, we see that the economic model is extremely difficult. If we look at what's happening in France, with the difficulty of the relay organizations, we have the same thing happening. We take the cream of these clothing pieces, and then we sell the rest to export. Well, so there's a structural drop in the value of the clothing. And so we look at the origin of the problem, the value of the clothing, which are lesser and less in quality, and in fact have a lower value. Okay, now you, Edem Almeida, have created a sorting center in Togo, and you came to textiles by chance. Yes, by chance, because the biggest market for used clothes in Togo was about 2 kilometers from our recycling center. So we obviously started interested in different types of waste, metals, etc. And then I asked myself, why not textiles? Now, you know that in Europe, I was confronted with the question of textile, and I thought we need to find the same solutions or offer the same solution for clothing, for textiles. When we looked at the market, there were a number of realities. First of all, if you we scratched, you know, the surface only, and if we look at the used clothing, the problem was identical with that of plastic waste. So little by little, we started contacting the different players. And what we came to realize was that the real problem was the quality of the products arriving, the origin of the waste. Well, we came to realize that certain sellers and suppliers could send us 20, 30 to 40% of products which could not be resold. You know, to sell coats when you live in a country where the average temperature is 35, well, it's not useful. Hats, you know, woolen hats, not usable either. So there was a problem at that level. And then coming back to what was said, you need to take into account that we went from a situation where the used or second-hand clothes market was, in fact, a development activity. People used it to become rich. Whereas in West African countries, this market is carried essentially by Nigeria, the Igbo. And then little by little, it became part of the what I call the poverty economy. Given that you have this poverty economy, everyone got into this. The people from Togo, Ivory Coast, etc. And so it became a kind of survival economy. And so this is perhaps part of the problem. And to conclude, one of the conclusions we came to was that the real question or the real solution cannot be broached from the angle of Friends of the Planet, etc., on the African side. You should stop thinking that because it's good for the planet, and I must say that we're all sensitive and aware of this. Of course, I'm a friend of the planet. You know, I think that we need to do all these good things. But the equation on the other side is a social equation. It's social peace. When you have economies which are supported by 80% by the so-called informal economy, well, you have a lot of questions linked to social peace, social tensions that our governments are faced with. And we come to realize and perhaps understand that the impact of announcements is legitimate. When you're in a country with a highly performing regulatory framework, we don't have a problem with the legal aspects because the legal arsenal, it performs. What the problem, though, is the application of these laws, which is going to come into direct conflict with social peace. So, you know, if we say that it's not good for the planet, it's not good for the African economy, then the subject is not going to be acceptable. Now, I think that you are in the Beauvais area and you federate some 80 cooperators. You've worked with the different people, etc. And today, you want to work more quickly, Jacques? Yes, well, I'm the president of a cooperative created 20 years ago, and we grouped together lots of players. In 2008, we had grouped together a number of recycling centers, and we were trying to see, oh, sorry, this is Rachid. We were going to try to see how for our territory and for the members of the cooperative, how the recycling could be worked. In 2017, we organized economic group to try to determine what our problems are, because we are what we are, because our companies know each other. Perhaps we can find new solutions. How can we share resources to find solutions? So we wanted to work with the circular economy on several subjects, on recycling of technical aids. On we work with a professional recycling center for construction waste. And then in 2017, 2018, we came to realize that, having heard everything I heard here, is that if you create a company that has to manage textiles, about 30 to 40% of the textiles will end up in Africa, almost systematically. And you have a lot of players in the recycling activity who are quite honest, they don't know this subject. So what if they don't need something, they sell it to someone else who buys it by the kilo, and they don't know exactly what's going to be done with it. But working with the team around me, we came to realize that there's a portion that's resold and resold again, and it could end up in Africa. So we decided we were willing to develop solutions for textile, but our first goal was zero waste. So experimenting on a territorial basis, we created a collective company in 2018 called Solitex, and we tried to determine how we could create zero waste even in Africa. And so try to see what the relationship is in the value chain all the way to the last link in Africa. So we have different types of collections in different companies of the Beauvais region, in the hospitals, and working with the law on waste, etc. So we have to create an awareness. And I think that during the COVID epidemic, we all came to understand that people need to bring their waste materials in the best condition possible. Then it's important to have a sorting center on a proximity basis. We have a agile plan, Solitex. The first of these was for about 1,000 tons. And we saw we needed to sort differently. I'll skip the details, but as far as Africa is concerned, we said that we needed to really control what we send to Africa to ensure that at arrival there is as little potential waste as possible. This means you need to master the entire chain and ensure that you have value. Well, we came to realize with a company we had the conditions to have products that we wanted. So we created a joint venture with the Arrache Group next to where we are. We created GDR, which has existed with some 350 recycling plants. We have a tool whereby from upstream to downstream, we all agree on what is waste, and including in Cotonou, Benin. And so we can talk about this after. We'll talk about one of the key points is traceability. And the other important point is to share the value. What are the new economic models we can create? Because even if the entering value is lower, we need to share that value throughout the chain. Thank you, Rachid. When we prepared the discussion, you said the solution was before our eyes, but we just didn't see it. Yes, I'm convinced of this. I started with two partners in my sector, with a colleague in Charlelieu near Rouen. And at the exit of the COVID period, we invested a lot of money at that time to build a recycling plant. We took end-of-life clothing pieces to create a fiber. From the technical point of view, this works well. And we're in a market which is quite well controlled, contrary to yours. We have 6,000 tons in the market. We created a plant that can process 3,000 tons. Initially, we worked with white, and we were able to believe that it was good. And with the GEC law that was promulgated after COVID, we could propose this to our customers, the hospitals, clinics, the army, and the local authorities to incorporate 20% of recycled materials from the circular economy. So we embarked on the process. We saw in 2 years' time that we saw that the public authorities were not forced to put these recycled fibers in their products. But what we learned very quickly was that the professional textiles were not concerned. So today we see we're on a small island, the water's rising, and as far as the eco-modulation is concerned, well, our customers do not want to buy our fiber, recycled fiber, because they're not forced to. So what you say is true. For the last 10 years, we see the textile value chain has collapsed. I see it in our business. The prices in my business, B2B, has been divided by a factor of 2, and this with the same quality. So if we do not integrate into the value chain the cost of the collection of the product and the end-of-life product, we're not going to be able to make it. Let's say when you buy a pair of jeans, which is paid 50 euros, the cost price is 5 euros. Everyone is included in the 50 euros, the transformation, the transport, marketing, storage, etc. If there is not a minimum of 1 euro for the piece of clothing that the consumer is willing to pay for transportation, for design, for marketing, he has to agree to pay what it costs to collect, sort, and recycle the product at the end of its life. If we don't do this, and if the authorities don't help us to put this in place, we'll not be able to succeed. We are 3 family-owned groups, and we earn 10 million, the 3 of us, and we're not making money. The bankers will not support us. If the legal decisions do not move in this direction, we will not be able to survive with this. Why is it? I think there's a lack of courage. When we talk about this, for example, the extended responsibility of the producer, people call it a tax, but people, know there's assembly, transportation, marketing, design. Everybody agrees to pay for that. But the reprocessing, the transformation of the product at the end of the life, who pays? It's the end buyer. He's not going to change his consumption. We're proposed products at 380. Well, yes. This is expensive. We're not going to pay 10 euros for something that we can get for 3 euros. And maybe it's going to last longer, and maybe I won't have a wild consumption. Yes, but if we talk about the laws, Julia, yes, there's a question of acceptability. Industrially speaking, 1 euro per. You're saying it costs 1 euro to recycle? Yeah, more or less. Today, in the industrial chain, chain with the sorting, etc., is what it costs, 1 euro per piece of clothing. So we come to the word acceptability. You know, Julia, do you think that the consumer is willing to pay €1 for a piece of clothing, knowing that they might buy clothing for €2? Now, the extended responsibility of the producer is not a consumer tax, it's the producer's tax that has to deal with the product. If I had to manage the end of life of a product, it would cost more. Why is it the downstream sector is under such tension? It's because the contributions do not enable us to cover the cost of the end of life of a product. There is not enough money to cover the end of life of the clothing, the collection, etc. It's not the consumer who is, in fact, opposing this cost of the extended responsibility of the producer. It's the producers. You know, if you look at the problem, the mother of the problem, the origin of the problem, is because clothing is not expensive and people are consuming astronomical quantities of these low priced products. And if we don't play on the contribution so as to pay the right price, the cost of dealing with these products at the end of their life, we will not succeed. I think there are many solutions. Recycling plants, recycle can do everything we want, but as long as we don't play on the price of the clothing, when we don't pay to ensure the quality of these objects, then it's like trying to fill a bathtub without the stopper in place. It's like putting a bandage on a wooden leg. I mean, we find ourselves with incredible problems, the ecological problems regarding the waste. But when we produce greenhouse gases. Look at the situation in Valencia, Spain. Look at the economic problems. Look at the low-cost fashion, the consequences on the textile sector. Look how it is impacting the repair sector, the sorting sector, the recycling sector. Look at companies that cannot sell a recycled a textile fiber because the price of a piece of clothing is €3. So there's all kinds of problems linked to this low-cost fashion. There is a need for a law which regulates the fast fashion, the low-cost model. And so, you know that is there any possibility here of improving the sector, because the money has to serve the entire value chain. And this is especially true for the countries, in fact, which are suffering. There's all the territories that have to be served. There's got to be a global rule, a more important rule, and there has to be a law like the law that was adopted at the National Assembly. Why not have import quotas, as was the case until 2001? So, I think we come back to what we were saying earlier. We know how to do this, but it's not done. I find myself in a position which is quite comfortable because, in fact, I could navigate between the two continents. So, in fact, here it's not just a question of waste from the ecological point of view, it's the question of opening up that cooperation. You know that when I listen to you, I think that the problem will be even more important for the Western world tomorrow. We have two totally different problems, and I'm going to explain this. The political choices of the Western countries are totally different from the political choices made by the Middle East, Turkey, and China vis-à-vis Africa. We have a second-hand clothing market, and here in Europe, we only see the second-hand aspect. Africa has changed. It's not just a question of low prices, small brands. Why is it today Africa is in fact in a situation in my city of Lomé, we see boutiques, stores, which every day open with new clothes because today the African salesman is no longer waiting for containers of used clothes to be sent by Western, Chinese, or Arab salespeople. Today, the political choices of these countries make his life more or less difficult to get a visa in 24, 48 hours. And today, he doesn't have a lot of choice. So he's going to buy new products at low prices, which in fact are going to compete with secondhand textiles. So you have a population which has a buying power, no matter what people say. Africa is not just a continent of poverty. You have a middle class which is growing more and more. Don't forget the influence of the diaspora, African diaspora, who comes home and they bring new opportunities, new models. So I think the problem is going to be very important in the future because not only we have to sell, but to sell, you're going to have to sell at a loss, I'm sorry to say. Economic problem. So the industry is very threatened.
So for about 10, 15 years, the textile has been suffering. So it's the textile industry that is going to be increasingly impacted in the West. And then on the other side, the problem that will remain and still needs to be solved is that we will have a new configuration of the market. So the second-hand market will be an internal market in Africa in 10, 15 years. But it will be an internal market of new products, so good quality products, and which will be sold and put on the market. So there are a couple of initiatives taken by young people on the reuse of this clothing. So this is a second kind of force that is coming into play in terms of this issue of reuse. I'd also like to draw your attention to these different choices, political, strategic, geopolitical, which damage all the goodwill in the world and the logic that we could have on this issue of obligations, solutions, but our different countries have a big role to play there. So I saw your reaction to that. Well, it depends on where we're going to put the limits in place, because, okay, really what we need to do is to cooperate between operational actors, operational players, because we've realized that in terms of habits, buying habits, the reality of that is that things are changing very quickly. So I think that we can find short-term solutions, but this requires cooperation which would create value. So I'm not going back to what we said before, but which would also bring some of that volume to the ground so that it could perhaps pay for some kind of tax. So there are 7% of things which cannot be resold. So we shouldn't sell them by the kilo. We have to take on that responsibility, and we negotiate with the government, we negotiate with the trade unions to say, okay, this is 5% and we'll pay a tax on this so that you have the means to manage this volume. So that means that you could have workshops, transformation workshops. Those would be autonomous because of the solidarity of all the different players in the chain, and they could invent new solutions. So solutions in 20 years' time may be the resources that Europe may need. So that, in fact, is quite likely. So there's this issue of time, the interpretation, and then the different beliefs. Because up to now, waste, well, at least in Africa, and I imagine in a lot of third world countries as well. So they said, okay, well, we're going to get the right volumes of this. But if you look at this a bit more in depth, it's not really the case anymore. So we're moving away from those principles. And then the second thing is that we've got these economic strategies that filter down from the top, but then we have international cooperation, that kind of thing, which so filter down from the top, which apply to everybody, but also in terms of interests. Sometimes these are non-negotiated, not shared with the players, and it creates the opposite of what it should create. So in terms of the policies, there's this, and this is really important, because you have to think about the possibility of war, because if we don't reinvent our relationships through economics, business, relations between Europe and the rest of the world, for example, then there will no longer be any transactions. And so this will mean predation, and at the end of the day, war. So we have reached this level of difficulty. So my role is also to keep the time. So things are moving very quickly. So if we kind of draw some concluding words, Jean-Jacques, so what should we start with then? We all have to get round a table, apply more regulations or get rid of some of those regulations. So we need to separate the challenge and the political debate and separate things from society. And we have to put the market at the very center of things so that it should guide us. And then integrate into the value chain the cost of these items. So the manufacturing cost of a fabric, so €1, whatever. So, but that's what we need to do. Julien, a couple of ending words. I think it's very important to say that no country receives second-hand goods. So it is, so we may have mixed things up here. So there's economic dependency, which means that a whole swathe of the population may suffer. So we can't ban exports of second-hand clothes. We need to keep this in mind, and we have to look at the issue of economic models upstream. So that means as long as we produce clothes en masse, then we'll have this problem. So we can try and implement all kinds of solutions, but we really need to look at the economic model of the textile industry. And this is what the fast fashion law is all about, which is currently blocked in the Senate. So the role of policy is the role of regulation. So there's one thing that we need to do is to make sure that this law passes. It's urgent to do that. And we need to keep in mind also the fact that the EPR exists for a specific reason, to give a second life to these clothes. So this means that we need quite a lot of money in order to subsidize recycling and to pay the real cost of collection, incineration, whatever, and exports. And at the end of the day, we would have fewer problems if we've attached more value to clothes and have a higher quality clothes. So, and that means that the value of second-hand clothes would increase. So it's not just about getting rid of all these tons of clothes that we don't know what to do with, but these will be clothes which have lived as long as possible. And this is why the circular economy, we have to be careful that it doesn't become something else. So sharing value, but not just the economic value, it goes beyond that, the value of materials and also immaterial value, excuse me. So it's quite clear that we need to invent the solutions for the future, and we have to kind of move away from things. There are two parameters that we haven't really discussed here, but it's in terms of a given territory and find a balance there. And this is what we do in terms of economic cooperation. There are 30 different players thinking about this particular balance and ecosystem for the circular economy and textiles in particular. So think about new consensual ecosystems. And the other thing, and this goes back to what the ADEME is doing in scenario 2. So not just think about the industrial global solution, technological solution, but we have to think about something quite different. And we have to try out innovation. And if we don't try it out, we can plan everything. And and this is one of the risks. We could increase by 4 the things that are not working at the moment. So we need to try out experiments. Edem, last closing words in very few words, because we can see the time ticking over. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to really insist on a couple of aspects. I think that the issue in terms of the destination countries can't be solved through politics. But international cooperation, this has to completely change in terms of the mechanisms involved. Everything that is put up as a solution today, it has to be a solution with a human focus. So if we continue to look at this issue through the humanitarian angle, then that would have a damaging impact on some of our economies. But if we provide support to economic initiatives, and if we create these links, these relationships, and I think it's important. I'm saying this for Africa. Everybody says it's Africa's time now. But so we meet up in Zurich, Geneva, Paris, whatever. But in reality, when we look at the support for Africa and the mechanics there, even having access to funding, which come from public funds, they're in fact an obstacle for the development of economic opportunities now in Africa. So we support initiatives then, for associations, and they don't create value and they don't provide solutions in terms of social innovation. So creating links, ties for companies, that's Western companies, economic opportunities on the ground, which are able to develop resources, raw materials, which could be reused. So that would be part of the circular process. So I think that would be an interesting prism to look at things through. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause.
Le temps, je l'ai dit.
So as I said, time is really a fierce opponent. So time is just ticking over. There's nothing we can do about that. So we can't close this chapter without trying to understand the geopolitics as issues which underpin major exports. We saw this with Pascal Anselme, so the increasing contribution from Chinese exports. So we're going to try and understand what's behind this with Gilles Guilleux, who's a professor of Paris-Cité and a researcher. So after the jingle. Please have a seat. So we're going to sit down. So Gilles Guilleux, so you're a professor, a university lecturer, and you're a specialist of China, just to keep things short. So I think that we need you so that we can set the scene and we can talk about how China is a major player in terms of textile production. And also, and we have a couple of slides to show in order to underpin and support your presentation. So yes, that's what I'm here for. So that's the first slide. So the first point that I wanted to point out is that China is not just an exporter. China is a producer and also a consumer of clothing. So 20 to 30% of the national production, Chinese production, is exported. But the rest is consumed on site, as you can see with these figures here. So the growth has been exponential there. Chinese clothing, used clothing, is exported to destinations all around the world. 2022, 2023, $800 million in terms of textile exports around the rest of the world. And the volume of these exports can be explained by the fact that recycling in China is not at all carried out. So especially for two reasons, principally the low cost of the clothes bought in China, and secondly, the fact that there is a social kind of hesitation. People don't want to reconsume or reuse secondhand clothes. So even if some people, especially young designers, are now starting to produce clothes from secondhand clothes. So it's not because it's forbidden in China, it's just that it's not a cultural habit. So there's a second reason, which is the issue of the fibers, recycled fibers, which there are certain regulatory obstacles there in terms of using recycled fibers for manufacturing. And so we know why. Do we know why? Well, it's something to do with the history of the textile industry in China. Second slide, main exporters of used clothes in value. So this situation means that China is a major player when it comes to exporting used clothes. Second behind the US. And you can see these, they're very close to the US in terms of figures. So we're talking about $800 million in China. So, and also exponential growth of those exports. So those exports basically are destined for the African continent. And we've already mentioned that before. Now, if there is an export market, that means there's also a demand. In Kenya, it's 10% of the population, the working population, which is employed in this ecosystem, the ecosystem of distribution of recycled clothing. And that's clothing from the abroad, and basically most of those that clothing comes from China. So we can also mention the geopolitics in terms of China, the position of China, and the issue of Sino-African relations. This is not something new. Let me remind you that for 30 years now, the beginning of the year, the first visit of the Chinese foreign minister is to Africa, and that's been going on for 30 years. So China is the leading commercial trade partner for Africa and a leading investor as well on the African continent. And so China exports a lot to Africa. It imports raw materials that it needs for its industry. And what's less known is that China, there's also migration between China and Africa. So one of the previous speakers talked about an African trader they're very present in the Chinese markets, and that's the textile markets. They sell in pret-a-porter items, and some of them. So really actually settle in China, the idea of so China is welcoming and creating policies around these businessmen with long-term visas, and sometimes they marry Chinese women. And then there's also a population of businessmen from China that small investors, if you like, not just large companies, but small investors that actually go and settle in Africa. So migration both ways around. So you say that textiles then a part of the major trade wars, but this is just one factor. So I'll take your raw materials and you take my clothing. So there's a whole ecosystem that has been created in terms of these Sino-African relations. So it's not just about used clothing from China to Africa, but there are investors as well. And I've had interviews in some companies, clothing companies in China, and they've developed delocalization strategies. They've invested in Southeast Asia, in particular in East Africa, and for example, Ethiopia. And that means that the labor for that is cheaper even than in China. So you sent this third slide, the contribution of Chinese experts in the world market. So here I want to illustrate the importance of Chinese industry. In terms of textiles, it's about 30% of the articles that are manufactured around the world. Those are manufactured in China, with a slight drop over the last couple of years. What we've seen recently is a drop in imports in richer countries, so that's Europe, the American continent, of Chinese textiles, and this is due to the geopolitical situation, the issue of forced labor, the Uyghurs, and the issue of de-risking for companies. And so China has become very aggressive on other markets, for example, especially in Southeast Asia. So, of course, China has a rather sensitive economic situation at the moment. So that situation increases competition, and the prices of Chinese exports has gone down. So the prêt-à-porter exports from China, the price of those items have gone down. Another piece of interesting information is that when China doesn't export clothes, it exports fabrics. 42 of textile articles around the world come from China, and they also export fibers. So China is a major player in the textile sector on a world scale. So let's look at the economic crisis in China. When we prepare this conversation together, you pointed out that there was a lot of fragmentation in the textile industry, lots of very small companies. So perhaps this is a kind of false image of the conditions in which prêt-à-porter items are made in China, because on the one hand you have these huge companies that employs thousands of workers. The control of those workers is quite severe, and so they're not necessarily housed on site. Sometimes they were sleeping in dormitories, but that's less the case these days. But it's an industry which is absolutely huge, and which works on the orders received from our countries. But within that industry, you have loads and loads of smaller establishments who employ 10, 20 people, and work is very flexible. So you take people on, and when you're at the top of the cycle and when you're at the bottom of the cycle, you fire them. And they don't contribute to the social security system, etc., etc. So an industry which is very composite, if I may say so, with these huge companies and then this whole host of smaller players. So the current success of Chinese fast fashion, Shine, for example, depends on this flexibility, the flexibility of these small companies that in fact it's based on, because textile production in China is it's done by all these different subcontractors and basically carried out in small establishments. What can Europe do about this then? You're telling us about this, the reason for this excess production. Two figures spring to mind, which perhaps you've seen quite recently. On the one hand, this concerns the production conditions, the distribution, consumption. So a lot of rich countries now buy online. So that represents the 70 aeroplanes that leave every day to deliver goods to customers around the world. And 25% of packages distributed by La Poste are for Shine. So it's a huge quantity, a bit like Amazon, and this. So I did an interview with La Poste that works with Shine, and they explained that we can't continue like this. We don't have the capacity in our airports. We don't have the capacity in our warehouses to manage all these packages that need to be distributed. So what can Europe do about that? Well, we agree that so we can't do this at the national level. So we have to do it at the European level, because China is excellent in terms of its diplomacy and doesn't hesitate to pitch one European country against another. And one of the measures which have been planned, and this is true for these different packages, so the price is absolutely astounding, very cheap. So, and these products that are bought online for European consumers, and then so there's something quite simple to be done there. We can tax these products. So I'm not an expert in this matter, but how can we dissuade the consumers, European consumers, to buy a t-shirt at €2? We're going to talk about this with Pascal Boniface at the beginning of the afternoon. We're going to talk about Europe. So I think that there are two collateral victims in this war, this trade war, which is quite disproportionate. One of first is the climate, and then the African continent as well. Well, the climate, this starts in China because the production conditions in the textile sector are absolutely deplorable. So we've got the regulations for the environment and also for the working conditions. They exist, but they're not applied often. So if you ask the Chinese administrations, so basically this is the work of the Chinese authorities, but they don't necessarily do it. So it's complicated because in China, you have so a labor force which is ready to adopt these deplorable conditions. I think things are beginning to change due to the slowdown in the economic situation. I think that China has come to the end of a phase of exponential growth so double-digit growth, and now we're talking about growth levels of about 5%. And what we know is that the labor force is or the new generation, let's say, is no longer ready to work in these in the same conditions as their parents. So 6 days a week, 7 days a week, in these absolutely this situation of insecurity and also really negative health conditions. So and now people are really focusing on the education of their children so that they don't have to become manual workers. So we've come to the end of a cycle then in China, and perhaps we should remain optimistic because, as you know, the population is going down in China. Last question. So we saw that in the car sector in China, I imagine that before there were lots and lots of different small players and they've consolidated. Now we've got these huge players, world players. So when I was preparing for this, we talked about the car industry, where the decisions are taken by the state, and China has a authoritarian government, so that raises some problems. But the advantage is that when a decision is taken, it is very vigorously applied. So in terms of the car sector, the Chinese government has decided to focus on the production of electric cars.
Et résultat des courses, la Chine aujourd'hui a des avantages comparatifs considérables sur le marché mondial.
So there are quite considerable competitive advantages on the market.
I think that the big difference here is the Chinese government in a position to take the measures necessary to change the Chinese ready-to-wear sector. You know that China uses on a massive basis non-recyclable fibers. So the decrease of prices of clothing produced in China is linked to the massive use of synthetic fibers. And so this clothing is not recyclable. Is there a reason for this? Of course. It's cheaper. It's a question of price. Is the Chinese government in a position to transform the textile industry? Well, the difference with the automobile sector is that in the automotive sector, you had a lot of public players.
L'industrie publique qui existait dans la Chine socialiste, celle d'avant 1980, a complètement disparu. On n'a que des acteurs privés. Et ils sont extrêmement nombreux. Donc, dans quelle mesure le gouvernement est capable de taper du poing pour transformer les conditions de la production de ce secteur? J'ai des doutes. Ce qu'on peut quand même dire, c'est que dans le passé, un des leviers de la transformation du secteur, c'est le niveau des salaires. Dans le passé, le gouvernement a été contraint, je pense au début des années 2010, à une époque où la main-d'œuvre ouvrière se mobilisait avec des grèves, des arrêts de travail, et puis plus tragiquement, vous vous souvenez peut-être des suicides. La conséquence, c'est que le gouvernement a décidé d'augmenter rapidement les salaires. Il y a certaines années, les salaires ont augmenté de plus de 10%, certaines entreprises ont augmenté les salaires de 30%. Voilà, mais c'est sûr que si on augmente les salaires de 30% dans le secteur, on met à bas un grand nombre de petits acteurs de la filière.
Moi, je retiens qu'il y a quand même une prise de conscience là-bas, que ça peut justement se transformer par le bas.
So, in fact, things are transformed from the bottom up, perhaps. I think that the capitalism is in fact a question of cycles, and I think that we were faced with a number of production and consumption modes for clothing which are not bearable anymore, and things are going to have to change.
Comment la Chine réussit-elle à avoir des coûts de transport aussi bas?
The question from Elodie is, how can China have such low transportation costs compared to European countries? Yes, I think that China is organized with extremely effective structures, and I think that the transportation issue was one of the major elements for the growth, with transportation, even air transport with planes that are almost empty, but taking place anyway. So how has this been financed? Partly by debt, partly by local governments. And I think that China's strong point is the quality of its infrastructure and its financing. Any other questions with regards to textiles? So the question was, polyester can be recycled. So what is the possibility of creating new products from polyester that has been recycled? Oh, I don't know. I don't have an answer there. I don't know. Is it the blend of fibers which makes the clothing difficult to recycle? If you had a closing word here, something optimistic perhaps? I think that the solution is linked to consumer behavior. Here in China, in Africa, we heard earlier that people are buying more new products in Africa rather than recycled. Then it's a question of knowing what kind of new products people want. I think that as long as the industry continues to operate, offering, I don't know how many seasons a year of clothing, well, we're not going to be able to solve things easily. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, this morning, we listened to Gilles Guilleux. We saw the complexity of the CHF sector. You know that everyone in the discussion has said that everyone has a role to play, and the role is different depending on whether you're an importer, a local importer, or other. We saw there were many avenues of solutions possible. We're going to take the time to digest this. So I think we're going to have a long break. We meet back here at 2 p.m. precisely. See you soon.